Hi everyone. Um, this is the programming class. Essentially, we covered several topics until now. We first started with the Unix system, talked about the ins and outs of Unix, went through the Unix networking. Then we looked at Perl programming in detail. We went through all the aspects of Perl, how the various variable specification, what types of variables that Perl have. Then we went through like the data structure essentially, and then we also looked at the control structure. And then now we got proficient enough in Perl. Then we started looking at Tickle, Tickle and TK. Initially we started with Tickle again. We went through the same exercise of the data structure, control structures, how to manipulate Tickle, and some of the variable substitution and the variable substitution with the dollar, and we also had like some function substitutions basically that we looked at, how to run function within function using the square brackets, and finally we also looked at the TK essentially, and then we looked at how the TK you can write widgets basically, and then you can code all these graphical information, what kind of graphical structures are supported by TK. And then we also looked at some of the advanced concepts in Tickle, and then finally in the last few lectures we also covered some of the uniqueness with the synopsis Tickle, mainly the collections as one of the data types or data objects, and how to manipulate with the collections. I hope like you remember all those things like the get cells, get commands essentially. So I think like today we are going to switch gears again and then move to the next topic, which is the Python programming. So I will be talking about Python, and then also we will be finishing up with this Python programming as the main lecture. So let's begin in earnest with the Python programming. So what we will be talking about, we have about 13 chapters that we will be going through. First we look at some very basic stuff as to how to interact with Python, how to do some simple commands, things like that. Then we will go more into details, the conditionals. Then we will look at the functions, the Python functions. Then we will go through the iteration or the while loops and the for each loops and how to specify those things in Python. And we will look at strings, the collection data type, which is which we introduced in the Tickle programming, but we will be looking into that. Then we will go through some advanced functions, exception handling. Then we will cover the Python module. So one thing is like why is this important? We will come to know in a short while, and then we will talk in more details later on. Then we will look at some of the Python files, the documentation, classes. Again, this is another key topic. Why do we do this? And then the CGI programming basically. So these are the main topics that we will be covering in this section of our class. So without much, so before we talk about all these things, I want to make sure that the Python language is similar to Perl, C, and Java, but it's only similar. There are some definite differences between these languages also. So initially I want to just give you some brief overview of what Python is, and then we will go into more details. Before that, some of the resources that you can look forward to. So again, there is Learning Python by Mark Lutz and David Asher. This is one of the books. Dive into Python, Mark Pilgrim. How to Think Like a Computer Scientist, Learning with Python is another one. This is by Jeffrey Elkner, Downey, and Chris Myers. And then the Programming in Python 3 is an introduction to Python language. Again, we will be talking about this number 3, and then there will be also number 2. So what is the significance of that? We will talk about that. And then finally, like this is a kind of a good reference basically that you can always go back to, which is the python.org. This provides you with if you are in doubt, you can quickly go to this website and check the answer for your particular problems. So the first question we ask is, now we learned about Perl, we learned about Tcl, why Python? So Python is a high level language, and you can do a lot with relatively little code. Perl, you can see that basically it can get cumbersome. Tcl, as you know, it was developed as a quick scripting language, but even in Tcl, programming in Tcl becomes quite cumbersome when it comes to complex systems. So why Python? It's also supposed to be easier to learn than the main competitor Perl. So it kind of replaces Perl with the more definite concepts. I'll explain to you those things. And Python nowadays is fairly popular among high level languages. In fact, some of the companies are built on Python. For example, Google. In Google, people use Python quite frequently, and basically that's the main programming language. And it has a robust support for scripts, and also it has a robust support for object-oriented programming. So this is where, when we talk about classes and various things, we will talk about that in the coming lectures. And then it also supports integration with other programming language. So basically, if you have Perl and things like that, different modules, you can easily call from a Python language into those modules. Okay. So now we will be going into the very basic stuff. The very basic stuff involves running some few Python programs. Then we will go into the variables, how to print, so the printing itself, and then some operators. Input, how do we input objects into a Python program, and how do we call comments, and then scope, the scope of the variables as to how they extend, and even scope of the program itself. So we'll take one by one. So the Python programs, basically, you can run Python programs from files just like Perl or shell scripts by typing Python followed by the program name .py. This py is basically the extension that we will be using. And in fact, this is the sure giveaway that it's a Python program. The file can just contains just the Python commands essentially. You can also invoke the program directly by typing the name of the file, just program.py. If it has the first line, the pointer to the Python installation. So here the installation is user bin Python. So if you do a hash bang user bin Python and at the first line in your script, and then followed by the Python command, then you can just simply type that particular file name and it will execute. Of course, you need to set the execution permissions. Once you do that, it will just execute. So this is just like a shell script. It works as long as the file has execute permission, as I mentioned. And then finally, like you can also enter a Python shell, and then the Python commands, you can run Python commands interactively by typing Python. So these are all like valid ways to do it. So now let's see how to do an hello world program. So here is what basically like with every programming language we have this hello world script. So here the example is shown here. We use the user bin Python and then just simply say print in quotes hello world. Again if you save this file into hello.py, then you can execute the permission on this file, basically like just do a change move u plus x hello.py in the Unix window, and then you can just run it as hello.py. When you run this program, the output is here, basically just prints this statement, this hello world. So this is simple enough. I think you should be like now very familiar. You should be confident to write Python programs. So now let's look at some more on the printing. So here we say print hello, and then we specify a comma and then x star star 2 x star star 3. So what this means is essentially it is going to print this string called hello, followed by whatever the value of x, then the x power 2, which is x squared, and then it prints x cubed. So here x is 4, so it printed 4, 16, and 64. And then whenever we specify \t, that is a tab character. So then it actually like moves it by a tab amount and then prints the next one. So if you say print 2 times 2 is equal to, and then within quotes, so this is not evaluated as a string, and then here we just evaluate 2 power 2 arithmetically. So the printing, you can see now that you can mix and match things. Basically you can mix variables with expressions with different types of variables. So this is all like the flexibility that Python offers. And if you end a print statement with a comma, that suppresses the new line, so that the next print statement starts at the same line. You can also print to an open file, and basically like it is just like this, out, then print, and then double arrow, say out file, and then the message. So the message will be printed there. So now let's look at some more fun stuff. So here we have another example, the basics of Py. So we specify the header, actually like this should be Python, user bin Python. Then we say print 1 plus 3, and we say something like pi is 3.1415926, and we just say print pi. We can also make like a message, and the message is a string hello world, and then we can put print message. So now the output of this particular run is going to be, the first one is it is going to evaluate this expression and prints the result, which is 4. For the second one, there is a print statement here this print pi, and then it's only going to replace this pi with the actual value. So this is the variable, and then it replaces the variable with the value. And then finally the last one, the print message, is again the message will be replaced with its own value, which is the string variable. So you look at this, basically you have a variable name which you never declare what type of variable it is, and then you also like can print those things fairly easily. So summarizing the previous example, as you see, like the pi and message are variables, but one is actually a floating point number, the other one is a string. And notice that we never declared these types in our example, and Python itself decided what types of these variables. So in Python, actually the variables, concept of variables are just it's just an object reference. This is also like we saw some of these kind of concepts in Tickle as well, when we talked about like these associative arrays and things like that, where index and value are or the index is basically it's just a placeholder, basically it's just an object reference. The reason we don't declare the types are because the reference might point to different type later on. So here is one example. X is 42, Y is hello. So print XY prints 42 hello. Print X comma Y. But you can also change this type into like actually like there's a statement, another statement missing, which is y equal to x, and then when you do print xy, now it actually prints 42 and 42 because now it actually like now changed the data type from the string back to this integer. So you can actually like in midway you can change the type of the particular variable. So again, this is another key concept with Python. So one thing that you can do is you can have so here is there is a function call. We haven't introduced the function, but let's say like there is a function called type that determines what kind of type it is. So here we define pi as 3.1415926. The message is defined as hello world, and then I is an expression 2 plus 2. Now if you ask Python to print the type of pi, type of message, and type of I, you get these outputs basically. The first one is a floating point number, the second one is a string, and then the third one is an integer. So it does recognize all the types. Only thing is it's intelligent enough to figure out how to apply those types, and also when to apply what type. So that's a very powerful concept. So how do we define the variable names? So the variable names can contain letters, numbers, and underscores, but it has to begin with a letter, and that's how Python identifies a variable name, and it cannot be one of the reserved Python keywords. Here are some of the examples: and, as, assert, break, class, continue, def, del, elif, else, except, exec, finally, for, from, global, if, import, in, is lambda, not, or, pass, print, raise, return, try, while, with, and yield. Actually, like, I mean, if you go to any of the websites that I mentioned earlier, you should be able to find these reserved words. The thing is, basically you cannot use reserved words for a constant or a variable or any other identifier name. The identifier name, basically, or a variable name, it's used to identify not only just a variable. These rules apply for a function, a class, a module, or any other object. And the other thing is, Python also does not allow the punctuation characters such as the at symbol, dollar, or percentage within any identifiers. Python is a case sensitive programming language, so that the uppercase and the lowercase are two different variables or two different identifiers. So now let's look at some more. So any names starting with one underscore, or basically underscore followed by like a letter, they are not imported from the module import statement. We will look at this one, basically, like this one later on, as to how to use that. And then names starting and ending with two underscores. So this underscore underscore b underscore underscore. They are special. Basically, they are system defined names. The names beginning with two underscores, but without any trailing underscore, they are local to a class. So when you define a class, the variables within the class follow this convention, which is two underscores followed by a name. A single underscore by itself denotes the result of a last expression. So this is again useful when we talk about functions, because one of the things that gets returned is underscore if you don't specify a specific return statement. This is something that we saw in the tickle side, basically. So those are the concepts that are still continuing in the in Python. So the key thing is, basically, the variables in Python, they are nothing but reserved memory locations to store values. This means that you can create a variable and you reserve some space in the memory. That's all. And based on the data type of the variable, the interpreter allocates memory and decides what can be stored in the reserved memory. So you can store integers, decimals, or characters into these variables. And Python variables do not have explicitly declared, do not have to be explicitly declared to reserve memory space. So this is what we saw in the earlier ones. So now let's look at some of the operators. So the standard operators, basically, that we all know of, the plus sign for addition, minus for subtraction, division, exponentiation. We also have the star for multiplication. And then modulus, basically, which is a remainder after division. And then we will talk about the comparison operators in chapter 2. one thing that I kind of talked about earlier basically is this concept of simplification. Basically, this is kind of a, it's not a purely a scripting language, but kind of high level language which also enables you to program in a lot of shortcuts. So one particular shortcut, probably like we'll talk about this, is this multiple assignment. You can do something like A equal to B equal to C equal to 1. This is like a basically everything is assigned to 1. You can also say A comma B comma C equal to 1 2 3. So everything is assigned once. Basically A is assigned 1, B is assigned 2 and C is assigned 3. So we will talk about some of these things also in the coming slides. So here is another example. This is known as the operators Python. So you know what 2 times 2 is, so it's 4. Now if you do a 2 star star 3, which is exponentiation, the result is 8. And if you do a 10 modulo 3, the answer is 1. Now if you print 1.0 divided by 2.0, this is something that we saw in the Tickle. This is a floating point, so the result is 0.5. But if you do 1 divided by 2, that's still treated as integers, so the result is 0. So this is exactly the same that we saw in Tickle as well. So in that sense, basically like it behaves like Tickle. Now Python has actually incorporated operators like plus equal to, which is like A plus equal to B is same as A equal to A plus B. So it's like a self addition, but the plus plus the increment or decrement operations, they do not work in Python. So now let's look at some of the type conversions. Essentially any int, float, string, boolean are converted to integer, floating point, string or boolean. The boolean is essentially will have just true or false respectively. So here is a type conversion routine. If you do print 1.0 by 2.0, the output is 0.5. Print 1 divided by 2, they are integers, so output is 0. You can also specifically mention it is float 1 divided by float 2, and the result is 0.5. And now you can convert this floating point into integers by simply operating it on as an integer, and then the result is just 3. And if you do a string, the result is exactly the same, because in string actually they don't have any meaning, basically it just reports a string. Now the bool function basically of 1 is true, and then bool function of 0 is false. Now some of the things that we saw in Tickle that's still applicable in Perl. For example, this string multiply basically. So if you have a string operator times 3 is basically like simply those things times 3. And then you can also use a plus operator or an addition operator on a string, and it just prints out together. So before we go into the next one, I want to also talk about a couple of other things. One is the numbers in Python. The data type is immutable. This is a new term. I'm going to introduce this. So immutable data type. What this means is the changing the value of a number data type results in a newly allocated object. So if you change the value of a number data type, results in a newly allocated object. So numbers are immutable data type. A number object is created when you assign a value to any of the objects. And Python supports 4 different numerical types. We saw one of them in the previous one, which is int, and it also supports long. They are called the long integers. Essentially, like usually it's represented in octal or hexadecimal. Then float, which we saw in the previous example, and then finally complex. And then the complex is basically for complex numbers. Now let's look at how do we gather input from the keyboard. So for this we use this particular function raw input, or we can also use just input. So let's see like how we can make use of this. So I equal to raw input, enter the math expression. So and then we print I essentially. So it says basically like enter the math expression, and then we say like 3 plus 2. Now the i's value is the same, 3 plus 2. It doesn't do anything, basically it copies into I. Now we say like j equal to input, enter the same expression. Now if you enter the 3 plus 2, it is evaluated and then the result is shown as the value of j. So we have like 2 ways of inputting a value or a data from the keyboard. One is the raw input and then the other one is input. So the raw input just copies whatever you type exactly as is into the takes it into the program. Whereas if you do just an input, basically it evaluates the expression first and then puts the result into the variable. Now how do we comment, use the comment in Python? It's very simple, similar. Basically the hash sign is used as a comment, and anything in a line after this hash symbol is treated as a comment. So you can put anywhere the comment anywhere, and it will just be treated as the comment from that point onwards in that line. This is just like Perl. So even in Perl we do exactly the same. Okay, So so far what we have done is we just introduced the Python. So we started with actually why Python. Basically, I think hope you had understood that concept basically. Where we talked about basic stuff, which is how do we invoke a Python. First of all, we talked about the high level language, how we can write code or relatively less code, and how we can write the code that are easier than Perl, and also like I mean how it is popular. Basically, Python is being used in several companies as their main programming environment. It also supports object orientedness, which we will talk about in towards the end of Python. But I want to introduce you to the object oriented programming concepts. And then finally, like it also allows integration with other languages. Now we also like talked about some of the things we wanted to see how to run Python programs, what are variables, how do we print those things, and then some of the operators and the various input to the how do we input into the program into the Python, and then the comments. We haven't talked much about the scope. We'll see like whether we can talk about that now. So for invoking the program, the Python program, essentially you can just type Python followed by Python program, or the other method is basically like if you put the path to the Python, then you can invoke it from there. Or the third method is basically like you can just invoke a Python shell and run the Python commands interactively by just typing Python followed by that command. So simple example, hello world, we saw this basically like just say print and then it will print. Some of the other ones basically if you want to print like the value of x squared and x cubed, it's very easy basically you just print hello and then followed by this, then it just prints exactly the same. You can also print like the strings. This is the whole thing is a string followed by a tab and then the actual expression. So the expression will be evaluated and the value will be shown. And we can also print the result or any kind of message into a file by just using the double arrow and then the out file. So we saw some of the variable types. Essentially, like I mean, can be a floating point, a string, or an integer. And I also mentioned that you can have like multiple assignments. And then the variable type can actually change, as I mentioned here, where initially it was a string type and then we changed it into an integer type by just doing an assignment. And then also mention that these variables are immutable types. So and you know the definition of immutable. And then the type, basically type is a function that displays the type of the variable. So you can just say type I, type message, type I, and then it prints out for each of them what is the data type that it used. And then we saw the rules for the variable names. Essentially, like, it should contain letter numbers, and it can contain letters, numbers, and underscores, but it needs to begin with a letter, and it cannot be any one of the reserved words in Python. So those are the things that you need to watch out for. One thing that is basically like is another key element in Python that we didn't talk about is the indentation. So the lines and indentation are very crucial in Python. Indentation. So if you say like if something true, then print, then we say else, then another print. So it knows that different levels of hierarchy through this the indentation. So it is very important to indentate your lines so that it doesn't give any error. We also saw like how to some more rules for the variable names. So single underscore essentially like this is to show that they're not imported from the module import statement, and then the name is starting with double underscore, that's a special or a system defined name, and if the names begin with a double underscore followed by the variable name without the trailing underscores, then it is a local to a class basically. So it's within the class any variables that are specified like this. And then finally a single underscore itself denotes the result of the last expression. So as I mentioned, you can use it for functions to return values. Now we looked at operators, some of the operators essentially, which is plus, minus, division, exponentiation, modulus, and then so the comparison operators we will introduce in the next lecture. So here is just an example of all the operators. Essentially, you can go through it at your leisure. You can see like how they get translated and what is the output for each of these expressions. The key difference is here basically like whether how do we do the floating point division versus the normal division, and if you use this thing basically again you want to make sure that your answer is correct. And then it has this plus equal to operator, which is combining the assignment and then the addition operator, but it does not have an increment or a decrement type of operation. On the string data type, the Python can accept a single quote or a double quote or even a triple quote and on a quadruple quote to denote strings, string literals as long as the same type of code starts and ends the string. The triple quote is usually used for strings that go across multiple lines. So if you want to span across the string across multiple lines, then you can use the triple quotes. And a single quote essentially is also legal syntax. And then we looked at how do we do an operations on strings like this me times 3 becomes me, or hello plus world becomes hello world. And if you want to input from a keyboard, the raw input basically and the input are the two functions available. So the raw input actually gets whatever is there as is, and then whereas the math expression will try to evaluate an expression, and that's what gives in the input value. So if you use input, then this mathematical expression is evaluated. If you use raw input, then it is not evaluated. Then we looked at the comments. We know that anything after the hash symbol is treated as a comment. It's just like Perl. So I think we will actually I think like we covered most of the things that we said we will be covering, except the scope of the variables. We will talk about the scope in the next lecture of the extent to which the variable names can be available. So that is something that we will talk about it in the next lecture. Okay, thank you very much.